a lot of coordination when we get a call from tenants. So inspections, work with our POTA group for when there's crossover, and Rio does both inspections and has an administrative, a licensing component to it. And then our outreach and grants programs support all that work. So I'll let Michelle talk a little bit about our housing inspections.
So this is a very egregious picture of housing conditions that is an actual real photo. And we always like to say this is like the worst of the worst, but we also work on the smaller of the smaller. So we want to know about any kind of complaint that renters have where their landlords are not taking care of issues. Housing and Building Maintenance Code, as Jeff said, the HBMC is quite detailed. There's a lot of requirements for habitable buildings. There's over 30 pages of what needs to be taken care of in a home to be a rental home. There are both land use and zoning codes also apply to rental homes. We don't want to have units that are unpermitted, so illegal units, units that are not allowed by zoning. Units that are illegal units, we come in and we give relocation assistance in that situation if it can't be permitted. But our preference is always to try to permit a unit because we want to keep people in their housing as much as possible. We have a team of about 14 inspectors and 2 senior inspectors who deal with other code issues as well as these, but also are in housing and doing RIO inspections. And as I said before, housing is our priority. So we're always going to put those inspections first. Emergency inspections for things like having no heat, no power, no water, those things get priority and are responded to within 24 hours. The other inspections that we deal with are a little bit slower, but we do our best again to put housing first above our other inspections. And those are the most important things in our work, even though again we're working on permits. The tree ordinance, which is a huge priority too, light and glare, junk storage, as I mentioned before, all kinds of other inspection issues. I'll hand it back to Jeff.
All right, thank you, Michelle. So Property Owner and Tenant Assistance Group, or POTA. So this is a team of specialists in Seattle's landlord tenant codes. We've got people that came up through like eviction defense and tenant law services and other people that were working in like social services, like 211 types of phone line support. Those are the type of people that tend to be in that group. We've got 7 people in the group currently. They provide advice, they administer, and when city codes are violated, they take enforcement action on Seattle's landlord tenant laws. So those are examples like when you get a rent increase notice or other notice requirements, there's very specific expectations in the city code for amount of time and language in notices, or move-in fee limitations, or just cause evictions under the Seattle's just cause eviction ordinance. And then they also administer the tenant relocation assistance ordinance, the city law that provides for assistance time for everybody in a building and economic assistance to low-income renters when a building's going through redevelopment. And then, like I said, the new economic displacement relocation assistance, which is 3 months of relocation assistance provided when a property owner gives a 10% or greater rent increase to a tenant, which has turned out to be quite a large new line of business for us. And good that we're helping tenants, and surprised at the amount of over 10% rent increases we're seeing. Rio, again, I don't know how familiar with you. Most of our interactions in Rio end up being with landlords because it's a regulatory and program that's imposed on landlords to get basically a registration with the city. It's like a license to operate a rental property. Most rental properties in the city are subject to the program with a few exceptions. So we've got 27,000 rental properties. Almost all the private sector rental properties are registered with us, and that's representing 160,000 units. It requires random inspections every 5 to 10 years. So every month we run a list of properties that are randomly picked and notify the property owners, hey, you need to get an inspection done. The idea was to focus on habitability for renters, but kind of take the burden or expectation off of renters to have to call the city when renters didn't feel comfortable or didn't feel safe or were afraid of retaliation from their landlords. Instead, they could have the city program randomly pick properties and make sure the properties are up to standards. We do about 4,000 inspections a year under that um, random selection system. And if we see problems on larger buildings, we can go further. So the way the program works, you inspect 15% of the units. If everything looks good, there's a presumption that the rest are in okay shape. If they're not, then we can go in and pick additional units up to including the entire building if we need to. Outreach and grants. So we probably all familiar with this. We have the Renting in Seattle website and infographics and kind of an ecosystem of outreach and information materials for landlords and tenants. We really try and focus on both audiences, um, landlords so that they have the tools they need to run their properties following the city codes and create a positive living experience for the tenants, and then for tenants so that they have the resources to advocate for themselves and know what the rules of the road are and know when to call us or other resources. We do trainings and events for renters and landlords that kind of backed off during the pandemic a bit, but we're getting back out in community now, and that's exciting to see. We have a landlord listserv that we can send out to almost every property owner or manager that has property in the city and give them updates on changes in the codes and resources for landlords. And then we do, it's a little over $2 million now. It's grown grants to partner organizations. So right to counsel, the eviction defense that the city guarantees, is one of our big grants. We do outreach and education with several organizations, supportive services, kind of casework for tenants in challenging situations. And then we have a real focus on trying to bring in and support BIPOC-led and serving organizations with our grant program. It's kind of keeping with the city's value of supporting these organizations and supporting race and social justice. So just a final thought. I don't know if Michelle wants to add to this, but I'll start with it. I know in the note we got that there were a few questions about contacting us, and I know we're getting lots of complaints and concerns from the community about how to reach us. And so I just want to emphasize the right way to contact us, especially for tenants if they're having issues or concerns with their landlords, is to call the Renting in Seattle phone line at 206-684-5700. And that's staffed during business hours. It unfortunately or fortunately doesn't take messages outside of those hours. If we took messages, there'd be a lot of messages to deal with every morning, and that's what we'd spend our day doing. So it's staffed during business hours. We have a phone staff of 4 people right now that are receiving tens of thousands of calls a year, and they handle basic questions. If it's clearly not for our department, they'll make referrals like over to the Office of Civil Rights or 211 or other resources. And then they'll do intake for cases that or complaints or questions that belong in our department. But they're not the experts that can provide advice right there on the phone. And we do hear a lot of concerns about that. But really, the only way we can manage the volume of calls we get is to have a front line to do basic questions. But when there's housing complaints that need an inspector or complicated landlord tenant issues that need some specialists, we need to turn that over to the people who have the best answers and are equipped to answer it. So every call that comes into our text that gets turned over for follow-up, it's tracked in a system. We don't lose track of calls. We don't always return them as quickly as we'd like. And that is, I think, a really important issue we're grappling with. And I think you all should be aware of. Return time is varying quite a bit based on urgency and workload. And right now we have a huge workload. Since we've come out of the pandemic, we had a 48% increase in intake to just our POTA group in 2022. Of course, 2023 right now, so I don't have statistics, but calls continue to be high so far this year. And so we had to put in a triage system where we try and deal with the most urgent issues, especially ones facing tenants first, and issues that can take some time to resolve or are just general questions or I want some information are behind those urgent issues. So first priority is like emergency conditions, like I don't have heat, sewage is falling up out of my basement. I don't have water. Some really critical life, health, safety issues. Those go to the front of the line for sure. Lockouts, like the landlord locked me out and I need to get in for my stuff. Evictions, rent increases, because they often have sort of a critical moment in a timeline where we can take action. Those go to the front of the line. Customers usually get a call back within a day or two on those. The reality is right now with our workload that low priority calls can take weeks, several weeks, going into months sometimes for a very low priority call. And we're doing our best to juggle that and bringing on temporary help and coming up with solutions where we can. But right now, I think we're respecting the values of the city of dealing with tenants in crisis first. And so I hope we are interested in feedback if we hear any of that. I don't know if you want to add to that, Michelle. I know your group's quite busy too.
Yeah, I will just say that we have had a huge increase in housing complaints since 2019. So that has been difficult for our staff to manage because, again, those are our priority complaints, but getting out to all of them when there's been such a huge increase has been difficult for us. I mean, we're on pause for some of the pandemic where we weren't able to enter people's homes. And so that's put us in a situation where we have quite a large backlog, but we've been working to address that. And I think, in addition to what Jeff has said about getting in touch with us, we also have an online complaint system. And so people do make online complaints about housing issues as well if they're not comfortable or they're not able to call during business hours. We're able to take those complaints as well. We do need a contact to inspect a housing issue, and so that is sometimes frustrating to people who want to make anonymous complaints. The reason for that is that we need someone to give us access to come in and do the inspection. So we really need a resident to be the one complaining or to be the one telling us that we have permission to come in. So I think those are the only things I would add to what Jeff's already said. We talked a little bit about our emergency preference, and absolutely we get out to those as fast as possible. But our housing complaints have been slower, unfortunately, and we are doing our best to catch up.
And I'd say, thinking for tenants that do want to call us or looking for that kind of help, I encourage them to call. Every call gets tracked, it gets logged. There will be follow up. But if you're calling in, be specific about what your situation is you're facing. If it's critical, if there's a critical timeline, let the person who's receiving that call know so we can put it in the right spot in our priority order. And then, please try and help us by being available when we are able to get back, usually, hopefully quickly, but if it's going to take a little bit of time, just understand it may be a few weeks if it's not an urgent situation. And but be available when we do call. We spend a lot of time, unfortunately, because of that time lag, we spend a lot of time tracking people down a few weeks later and kind of get into a cycle of phone tag, which then slows everything down more. So we'd love to speed this up. And like I say, we're taking actions to try and improve it. But this is the reality we're living with right now. So that was really it with a couple of questions that Zach gave us to get started. I'm going to turn the presentation off and have some more discussion.
Okay, well, Jeff and Michelle, first, I would like to thank you for showing up tonight. I appreciate that. I appreciate also what you shared. I recall last year when we heard from you that understaffing sounds like continues to be a big problem, not enough people to do the work. But I know that Dr. Gale has been before this board a couple of times at least before, has raised concerns about the interface between renovation permitting and especially the more recent of the tenant rights. We've had a lot of really good legislation from the city council in recent years protecting the rights of tenants and advancing them, for which I, as a tenant, am grateful. But there are also places where, there's like a clash between each party's interests. So one of the things that what Dr. Gale has been talking about that makes me concerned is, well, there are a couple of examples. One is it sounds like a landlord who wants to do renovations or needs to do renovations um, seems like a pretty low threshold, $6,000, I think, per unit or something. And there's a fabulous fridge out there that's like $13,000. I'd like one of those. And that could pass that threshold like that if I had a landlord who was generous enough to consider it. But when was the law written setting that threshold? And was it ever increased, or is there an escalator clause in it or something? Because it seems pretty de minimis. And if it was written in the 70s and it hasn't gone up like that, then it's basically uh, a minimum wage. It hasn't moved for a while, and that would need to be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think Treo sets that threshold fairly low, and I don't know when it was changed last. I mean, the law, yeah, came into effect in, I think, the 80s, maybe the early 90s, and has been, I mean, since well before my time in this business. Um, and it's a low threshold, $6,000, maybe some associated permit, but almost all redevelopment type work is going to trigger a permit, and it's going to get over $6,000 very quickly. Um, uh,
Exactly, which is something that concerned me because it's like if my landlord wanted to turn over my apartment, just put in some really nice granite countertops and maybe some new flooring, and we're there.
and
More.
an electrical permit and a plumbing permit, right? I think your observation is correct. I think that is what the law says right now. Um, uh, I've thought about this a bit. I don't know Dr. Hale's specific or Gale's specific circumstances exactly, but just generally, we've been hearing about this concern. Um, it's just there's another side to this argument, and it's kind of a tough public policy to grapple with. Right now, the very low threshold brings Treo the tenants in buildings. You raise that threshold, it's going to exclude development sometimes. So, on Treo is a tremendous benefit to many people. Uh, is it being used for the best purposes right now? I think there's a legitimate public policy debate to be had about that. But the complexity is when you change thresholds, you rule other people out in the future.
Right. And my related question kind of dovetails with that. We just spent a concerted amount of effort on appointing 7 members of the new social housing PDA. They're going to be looking at city-owned properties for development or redevelopment. This could trigger EPA-like cleanup first, things like that. Um, and when you have development or redevelopment and certain thresholds are too low, it really doesn't incentivize the city to take a low bid for a property its own that has maybe been languishing for quite a while. I read in a newsletter from the Office of Housing last month that they've got some new legislation proposed that would have more work for you guys. And I really wonder as to how much more your department can take on and where the fulcrum is that we can rest the lever on that's going to balance some of the benefits of the legislation to tenants, without stripping landlords naked. I don't think anyone's proposing that. Well, not many. But I think that right now the tenants in this city feel that they're up against a huge disadvantage from the people who own or run properties of almost any size. So with a new PDA that's looking to get in and provide housing, develop housing for people on the lower end of the working or unworking scale. We really need some kind of overview adjustment to make sure that the progressive newer laws aren't undercut by old laws that maybe haven't been updated in decades. So it just seems like you all would be in position to see that kind of thing.
Yeah,
How much in the feedback loop are you, or are you just in hamster wheel instead?
well, I hope we're more than hamster wheeling, but it does feel like that sometimes. I say I hadn't thought about the connection with social housing, and I guess just to understand what you're saying, are you concerned that the trail requirements that might actually thwart the development of social housing, that it would make it more costly and burdensome to put into effect? Or
No, I think that the Treo threshold being so low, actually, in a way, will work against social housing because the landlords who are taking advantage of the low threshold can hold themselves out as, okay, we have, shiny, clean apartments that you can come move into. But the people who've been living there for a while, who've enjoyed the benefit of not having the rent bounced up and up, and who, under the new laws, should be able to assert the right that, nope, you really can't, that 10%, that's it, that's the ceiling. You can't jump it.
right,
And there are even arguments being made that that should be adjusted downward for people on fixed incomes,
yeah,
veterans, elders, etc. So social housing is served by allowing it the space to occupy where low income benefits go, where low development costs go. It's not like we're going to make a special division with, zoning exceptions for them and permitting exceptions for them. As a matter of fact, when my term on this board ends, I'm going to be lobbying in Olympia for money for that PDA because they're going to need a lot of it, and there won't be enough people with the time and the energy to do that.
I
But
suppose.
you know what I'm saying? I'm just saying that to keep a something that benefits big landlords and wealthy landlords in a position where they can pay a little and get a lot more out of it seems like the antithesis of social housing to me. It's like, no, if somebody's going to get the benefit of a low price, it should be somebody who's offering something at a low price. It shouldn't just be something that someone can use to ratchet rents up outside of the new cap, or can use as a de facto eviction tool.
Yeah,
So,
I understand what you're saying.
okay.
Uh, yeah, and I don't. I guess thinking about our role, like Michelle and I do not bring legislation to the city council and say this is what we think um, you should do, dear city council members, right? It works the other way. The city council goes out, it talks to community, it analyzes what's happening, and it proposes legislation. So I think you seem like the perfect body to be discussing and sort of grappling with and advising these kinds of policy calls. I think for us to wade in on where exactly that line would be, well, I've got, a lot of layers going up to the mayor's office before we would start advocating for that sort of thing. I mean, I can confirm for you our observation, the threshold is low. Lots of development can trigger it. And I think I can say there's probably good and bad to that, right? It does bring more development into Treo, which does assist tenants legitimately in many situations.
Okay, I don't think I'm asking you necessarily to propose legislation or, you know, go testify before the city council. And I agree that this group is one of the many that should be raising their voices when concerns are seen. But y'all are boots on the ground. You are the eyes in the building. We're not. And so what you see matters a great deal. If you see nice buildings where the renovation is relatively superficial or cosmetic, rather than structural and safety oriented, you're in the best place to tell us, you know, what percentage, knowing that you don't get everywhere, knowing that you may have a cross section that's skewed because most of the calls you get are from the people who have a roof falling in or black mold or whatever. You know, I get that. That
Yeah,
would
I think
skew the perspective, but even so, the permitting thing cuts across all bands.
yeah, I'd say this concern of Freo being used to facilitate kind of cosmetic development is actually fairly new to us. So I don't have a tremendous history going back in Treo, but at least for the last few years, this is um, a new-ish concern. Um, I don't I guess I don't have any hard statistics for you, and it would be a little bit hard to tease out. I guess it would depend on a little bit in the eye of the beholder of what's substantial in life, health, safety, and what's cosmetic. But I think we've got a couple of examples now that are more um, upgrades, sort of remodels, if I were to think about it in the context of our house. Uh, but they still trigger those thresholds of development that the Treo ordinance says. And so if you wanted us to come back and help you inform your discussion and sort of your informing yourselves on where that line is, I could look and see if there's some ways for us to tease out sort of levels of redevelopment. I don't know what that looks like. I'd really have to go back and think about it and talk with our permitting folks to see how they might classify those permits. It might be the nature of the permits pulled if it's an electrical and plumbing permit, but not a building permit. Maybe that's a
Right, but even electrical and plumbing, you can move a fridge from one end of the kitchen to the other. And
yeah.
if you've got an ice maker or a water fixture in that fridge, there you are.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
So,
If it was
So
yeah,
there's
just
a
electrical, if it was just electrical or plumbing and not
apologize for the
a
noise.
construction permit, yeah.
But yeah, I would,
Dr. Gale, I would encourage you to wait. We have an obligation to allow you to be heard. The SDCI has come here. They're engaging with us. It's not public comment yet. We did not discuss them engaging directly with individuals of the public. It's 7:15.
okay. We do still have some time then. And Jeff, I would welcome any sort of data that you or Michelle, if your division also has some feed in with where the old meets the new vis-a-vis renters' rights, with the emphasis on renters. I would very much appreciate knowing that you can't define what's a cosmetic renovation and what's not, but I think that when you go in to permit something, you're looking at, are the apartments habitable? Are they comfortably habitable? Are they just getting an upgrade, and I understand that some of that may be anecdotal, and I would welcome even anecdotal data at this point. I'm not going to wait 10 years to see what falls out over time, because that's way too long for people who are facing harm. But I do welcome some sort of basis to stand on to make a pitch to the city.
Right. Well,
So
that's
yeah.
that's exactly the sort of thing we should be doing, is helping inform these kinds of discussions for a group like yours, like the city council. So I'll be
Okay, yeah, and if there's a way that you can cross-section and reframe a couple of data sets there, where these are the numbers of these kinds of permits that have gone out in the past year, in the past 18 months, in the past 2 years, and then try to define it by what I was saying about these are absolutely needed. The place was a shambles. It was, half the units were without electricity or had, malfunctioning electricity versus, wow, they went from granite to marble in the bathroom. I'd appreciate that. I'd appreciate whatever your inspectors and you can provide me with.
Yeah, we'll between Michelle and I talk it over and see what we can come up with.
Yeah, and I understand the last thing that you probably wanted was to come here tonight and get tasked with other work when you've got plenty on your plates. But yeah, I would appreciate something. I would like to have a basis for an argument.
I have a couple questions. So within the letter of the law, what level of discretion does SDCI have in investigating the legitimacy of TRAO complaints?
So and make sure I understand. Investigating the legitimacy of TRAO complaints. I guess we investigate for compliance with TRAO, and I think we've often got it on this property should have gone through TRAO and it didn't. What happens? And we look into those, and if they should have gone through TRAO and they didn't, we have some tools to get them to go through TRAO or sanction them for TRAO avoidance. On the other side, if a property is we get a complaint that it shouldn't be going through TRAO, I guess what I can say is right now, TRAO is the city law, right? It is a path that is available to property owners. And so we review them to make sure they're conforming, their proposals to make sure they're conforming with their path. We validate the nature of construction. We ask for information about the cost of the construction and the thresholds. We make sure if it triggers TRAO that they go through the TRAO process properly. Is that getting to your question?
To an
If
extent.
somebody expresses an opinion that a property shouldn't be going through TRAO, I guess we stand back on the application that we received from the developer and the analysis we did to determine that TRAO was appropriate.
And am I hearing from you that you haven't gotten a tremendous amount of complaints about this?
I think this is fairly new to our group. I was just talking with the supervisor of our POTA group, and we'd not heard a lot about this in the past. I hadn't, for sure. It hadn't reached my attention.
And so if a tenant was to lodge a complaint that there had been an abuse of the TRAO process, what would SDCI then? Would they just essentially be asked for receipts, timeline, to make sure that everyone was in compliance?
There's no
So
mechanism in the law right now for that. And so we're really constrained by if they have a development permit, then they're required to do TRAO. And if they're doing substantial rehabilitation or work that requires tenants to be replaced for 72 hours, then they're required to go through the TRAO process. And we're kind of constrained by those things. So it can be difficult for us to know whether or not that work really rises to the level of displacement for 3 days. But that is what the law constrains us to do. So we have to follow that.
Yeah, I think that's again, it's the tests are not that hard to trigger trail. This gets back to this threshold, and uh, it doesn't take a lot of hard work and careful analysis to show that a project is over $6,000.
So we do have more to talk about on Treo, but we, as an advocacy body, have also received other feedback from tenants about SDCI outside of Treo. I'd love to chat about that for a minute.
Sure.
But additionally, so we do have tenants here, Dr. Gale and others, who are requesting a direct dialogue with you tonight. We have an authority, we have a responsibility to engage with them because we're an advocacy body, and we're never going to turn away anyone who treats us respectfully. You came here to present to us, so I'm not going to make any demands of you. I don't know if my co-chair has a different idea, but later in the meeting, if you'd like to engage with the public tonight, I think they're very eager for that. Something to think about. But in the meantime,
I would be very grateful if either or both of you would do that. It's kind of an act of good faith.
Yeah,
I would think as long as everything is kept respectful, and that it doesn't become a matter of anyone talking over anyone else. If it can be a true dialogue, that would be something I would like to see as well.
Right. I think we can have it, like my ability to go into too many specifics will be limited because I've not been, directly involved in this situation. I'm sort of generally aware of it. So, but I don't mind having some respectful discussion. I think there's been discussion with others in our department already. So let's see where it goes, but let's make sure you get your other things that you want to talk about discussed tonight too. Right.
yeah,
There's a lot more going on than just Treo in our world.
let me slide those in real quick. So one of previously, we've had a couple people come to meetings. Some of the first instances of public comment we had for a while were about delays in SDACI response or to complaints that are triaged to be low level, or not hearing back at all, or that the enforcement mechanism that SDCI levied, against landlords was too minimal to elicit a change. So what would, when you say weeks to months, are we talking about like 2 weeks to 6 weeks for low level complaints? Or are we talking about like 2 weeks to 6 months?
Oh, not 6 months, I hope. Maybe 2 months on a really low level, like just to like have a general coaching question. Much to the dismay of landlords, that's what we're hearing from them. Those are often the people that are asking coaching questions, and those get put down the list.
Coach, I'm sorry.
Yeah, coaching. Like I have some questions about understanding a specific city law, like notice requirements or something, right?
Oh,
That's going to go well behind. There's sewage coming up out of my basement, or I'm about to get an eviction. Deposit returns go way down on the list right now because somebody has already moved out. There's civil remedies available. There's no specific timeline, so it can be followed up on. It's already after the fact, so it can be followed up on further after the fact. Kind of in the middle are things like EDRA and Treo, because they have very specific timelines and they're conferring financial benefits on tenants. So they're not as urgent as an emergency, but we need to do our review and processing and get the determine eligibility and get the payments out to tenants as quickly as we can. But I gotta say, I take no pleasure in talking about this, right? We do not find these acceptable levels of service. This is the reality we're facing, and what we believe, and I'm anxious to hear otherwise. We believe is sort of the most fair and sort of appropriate method of triage.
In that same vein, I'm sure you don't, you're not encyclopedic, but do you have a ballpark on what percentage of low and mid-level complaints reach actual investigation?
No, I do not.
I would say a fairly large number of them do reach investigation, except for things that are resolved by the time we get to it. And so that is quite a frequent occurrence. It would be really helpful if people let us know that things were resolved ahead of time, but a lot of times things are in our queue. And when we get there, people say, oh, that repair was made already. And so those are things that actually kind of slow us down in the process.
Yeah, I guess you were saying investigations, and I was thinking cases. I think that there is an important distinction, right? Every call that's still live when it comes up on our list, we do some investigation, right? We call the person back, we find out what's going on. If it's an enforceable action, we call the landlord. Um, uh, a lot of those don't turn into cases because we often, like Michelle said, it's already gone past, or we get voluntary compliance right away from the landlord, right? Oh yeah, okay, I'll go fix that. Or I will reissue that notice with the proper language on it. So that like high rate of investigation, I don't have good statistics on how many of those actually turn into enforcement cases, which kind of gets to your second part of like, are we being punitive enough? And I guess our enforcement approach, and we're pretty transparent about it, is to get compliance to solve the problem first. And fines, penalties, sanctions, those kick in later only when a property owner is unwilling to correct the situation. And that's partly right. That's doing our job. That's a service that's benefiting the tenant. It's correcting the problem. It's also because enforcement is a very slow and costly process. So it's not there's not a lot of immediate satisfaction in trying to pursue fines and penalties, get it up through the law department. So that's reserved for people that refuse to comply, and not very many people really dig in and refuse.
That is important to know. It actually requires a lawsuit for us to get penalties. So it's not something that was just off the bat when someone has a housing violation, we immediately issue a fine. And I think that's kind of a misunderstanding in the community. We are able to impress those fines only if they don't comply, and then we file a lawsuit and actually sue them. And so that's a very costly and lengthy process.
So if I can follow on with that, Michelle, do you need a better stick rather than a bigger one? Should there be some in between, or should you be able to trigger escalation in fines for not just non-compliance, but recalcitrance and, reckless disregard for, etc.?
I think all kinds of things could be entertained. There's definitely a difference between citations and notices of violations. So a citation is a right off the bat, you just get a fine. And we do have that ability for some of our land use violations, but not for housing violations. In the long run, I think, like Jeff said, our real goal is to get people into compliance and make that housing safe so that people can stay there. So we don't really want to just penalize people progressively for not doing something. What we want them to do is fix it. And if they don't fix it, we want to have the power to sue them and say they have to fix it. And so that gives us a stronger mechanism than a citation would, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
My last question before we slide into public comment is about your budget. We're not just here to grill you, I think. The TRAO issue is certainly concerning, but understanding that these delays are, ranging up to 2 months. What's the state of your budget, 2023 to 2024? Do you guys consider yourselves understaffed?
We have to be very careful talking about budget. The early stage budgeting happens for 2024 early in the year with us. but it's all under the direction of the mayor's office and the city budget office. And it's when the mayor announces his budget later in the year is when, you know, the budget is revealed. So um, I'm not supposed to talk about sort of internal deliberations. We are keeping an eye on staffing levels. I guess I can say that, and um, focusing on short-term solutions and offering some longer-term solutions and looking for process efficiencies. You know,
That sounds really sad.
I,
I'm sorry, not the part that you can't discuss things that are an internal process. It's that way at every level of every government. But that you, as one of the people with the best position to know what kind of fixes and where that your division needs and that your department needs, um, feel hamstrung. Um, I guess all I can say is, let us pick up the spear then. We need to know what needs doing, and we're willing to do it. Uh, it's not like we don't have a dog in the fight, but we don't need to have you in dogfighting with us. But split that hair.
yeah.
So,
I appreciate that, and I think the thing we can talk about is performance levels. And I could say this is the performance we're achieving with what we have. And uh, you know, I don't like getting criticism for the performance we're making, but that is the feedback loop and the tool we have right now.
right. Well, we don't want you to make up stories. So, yeah.
It's 7:33. I think now would be a good time for that engagement. We are going to try to end at 8, and we do have a little bit of logistics to talk about at the end. I would encourage everyone to keep things civil. I don't know if our reps from SDCI are totally briefed on your situation, Dr. Gale, but I would be comfortable opening the line of communication now.
Sounds like I better shut my line of communication.
Yeah, I guess I didn't know I was aware this request was made because it came to my attention. I think it's just working with our public disclosure folks to be clear about what the scope of it is, because all trail records is what I understood the request was, and all trail records includes, okay, that's, Nice. All right, so I appreciate, I'm sorry you're experiencing this loss of housing. I know it's awful. And, you know, I wish you all the best in sorting this out. Um, at its core, I think it's a fundamental disagreement with the whole Trejo path and that avenue that's available to developers and this threshold that's pretty low. And I think this is exactly the right body to be speaking to about that. And this body can inform the decision makers. And it's the law that is on the books right now. We need to follow it. And we believe that we've been doing our due diligence and doing a careful job on that. It's not the out.
Thank you, Dr. Gale. Is there anyone else on public comment?
Hi, my name is Valerie Schleret. There aren't many of us members of the public in this meeting, I think. So I'll just take a moment to say, I think what Dr. Gale has described here is, it's the sort of thing that is difficult for members of the public who are renters to parse out on our own, absent a lot of accessible information about it. And I think this is an example. What he's described indicates to me that this is probably going on all over the place all the time. And so this is, I think what we're listening to is, it's a bureaucracy enabled injustice on a very large scale. So I think I'd ask the Renters Commission, I don't know, to maybe work at actually getting the data and getting an analysis of what is going on here and how many people in the city are affected. And you know, maybe you have to see if you can get a grant or actually get someone paid to do that analysis for you. But we are a city that it seems that developers are kind of running the agenda, and big property owners are running the agenda in the city right now. And we do need a corrective. So thank you for that. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Valerie. Agreed. And I'm sure I'm not alone in thinking that the true answer to this is a legislative one. When you have one or several laws that are being used against their original intent or for an effect that is undesirable, again, I don't want to wait 10 years to get the best data possible. I want to see what the early indicators are and see if we can say this is being used against renters who had the right to expect a cap on rents, who had a right to expect that substantial rehabilitation means what the common understanding of those words are. So, yeah, it's going to take data to inform proposed legislation, proposed corrections. We may not be the ones to write those corrections, but we can certainly target them. And so that's what I'm hoping to get from all of you, wherever you're from, whether you're from the city and you have constraints on you of all manners, or whether you are a renting member of the public like me, who has other kinds of constraints, most of them economic. I would like to see some solutions or some potential avenues to travel brought forward. So, again, Jeff and Michelle, that's why I'm glad you're here tonight with the information you can share. And Dr. Gale, you have been a tireless advocate for yourself. And I admire that at whatever cost it comes to for you. I know it's exhausting to have to keep fighting Goliath, but keep fighting. We will find a way to address this. It won't be quick, and that's the unfortunate part. But I do have confidence that with your assistance, all of your assistance, we can get some cogent legislative proposals on the table and apply some pressure to see if we can't get them brought into passage. So again, Jeff and Michelle, I will appreciate any direction, information, data that you can share with me at any point that will make some corrections and balance the scales more, because they seem seriously out of balance. When developers find a loophole, they're going to exploit it until it's Wembley Stadium and there's no roof anymore. So, I'd like to avoid that.
Yeah, well, I'll see what I can do for getting you some data to give you some concrete information to inform this discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Dr. Gale and certainly Valerie. I don't know if we've heard from you or actually, I don't know if I can still see you in the chat. Oh, you are still there. But yeah, thank you both for coming. And to our reps from SDCI, I will say that some of what Dr. Gale was discussing is legislative in nature and in turn, is referencing the law itself. But I think some of what he was suggesting, and he is one individual and this is one case, was procedural. And it seems like he has receipts. We are a tiny advocacy body, but I want to notate that. And, certainly we don't have the ability to look into the details of his situation or anything else. We don't even have a budget, but I want to state that for the record. And I think we should all continue this dialogue over time. This is an important issue. We really appreciate you guys coming. I know we heard from you last year, and we've had some turnover since then. We really appreciate you being willing to come, back-to-back years. Dr. Gale, I'm sure we'll continue to hear from you. But it is 7:53. I don't think we even approved the minutes from last meeting, which is my fault.
Yeah, we didn't do it, but we had business.
We were busy.
We got into it.
Do we even have a quorum to approve the minutes?
I'm not thinking so unless you want to make us a subcommittee or deputize Zach.
I don't think we can.
I will move then that last month's minutes be carried forward to next month for approval.
Seconded.
Okay. So we can't vote on that, but the motion has been made and it's pending, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Cyndia, I know we haven't heard much from you today. Just want to make space for you.
I don't have much to add. Again, thank you for the presentation. It was a lot to learn. And yeah, I think we're just going to continue to advocate for renters with what power and resources we have.
Great. Zach and Kim, anything else for today? Oh, Zach, perhaps we could get an update on new commissioners.
Yeah, let me. You mean the ones that you all didn't appoint?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
On the new commissioners, can you share more? What do you mean?
So I know a lot of people have expressed interest recently in applying. Have we received any applications?
No, we've not received applications yet.
Okay. I know you've been shooting out emails like crazy, and we really appreciate
Yeah.
that. That's
Yeah.
great.
So no, I'll let you know when we have those.
Cool. Have we received any like forwarded candidates from the mayor or city council that they're considering?
No, not yet.
Cool.
I will let you know if there are.
Okay. Should we close it out then, team?
You said that you had some logistics.
Those were the logistics.
Oh, that's it. Okay, well, can I add to the logistics list then? It took me a year from when I was told I was a commissioner to when I got to be a commissioner. I know we recently had a person in a similar situation who walked away because waiting that long just didn't seem reasonable. So I'm wondering if we can, before we take on a new load of commissioners, although I'm very eager to have them, believe me, that we can revamp the timeline for approval and for getting things through. I know that this isn't necessarily a high priority item for the council and the mayor, but we don't need a lot of time. It's like 3 minutes tops. So if we can encourage the people who aren't us, who still sign off on us, to make it more of a priority so that people who do want to serve start serving ASAP, that would be something I'd be willing to draft a proposal or a letter on, just to get it maybe to Councilmember Morales, who we worked with on the task force for the PDA, just to start that process of revamping the process so that we can get the members so we can open the floodgates, so we can get more people, so we can have a quorum and approve the damn minutes. That would all be great. What do you think?
I hear you. It sounds like a plan. I'll work on it.
We can work on it. That's fine. Okay, that's it.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
And I also, yeah, I just want to thank Jeff and Michelle again for coming and presenting and answering the public's questions and engaging with them. And hopefully we will hear from you again. Sounds like there's some data that SRC is looking to have to continue a discussion about how to empower renters and the tension points that they can kind of start working on.
And Zach knows how to reach me anytime, any day. So I'm going to deputize you as my point person now. So
What I come up with, I'll work through Zach so he can get it to all of you.
thank
And
you.
Dr. Gale, I'm happy to share what I come up with you. I think I saw you had some chats in the comment. I just think you need to clarify with our public disclosure people what you're looking for. I think there was a misunderstanding about the scope of it. And my actual response to them was go back to the requester and clarify what they're really trying to get at. Because yeah, maybe just to respect the commission's time, if you're welcome to communicate with me directly on it, and I'll share what we put together with you. There's, there's no secrets in the data. The data is what it is. We'll see what story it tells.
Okay, it is 8. Jeff, I think that was a very generous offer to engage directly with Dr. Gale about some of these issues. Is your contact information available anywhere if he wants to take you up on that?
Yeah, it was on my slide there, and I think I guess I haven't been copied on anything from you. It's my name, jeff.talent@seattle.gov.
Dr. Gale, do you have that? Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Zach. Thanks,
Okay.
SDCI.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.